Welcome to the Partis channel. Today, we explain Prophets Kings 1, Chapter 5 in a clear and simple way, step by step. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this explainer today because honestly, this chapter, it's a total masterclass in diplomacy, logistics, and just plain wisdom. We're going to dive deep into the incredible historical events that literally set the stage for one of the most famous building projects in all of human history.
Section 1. Context. Solomon and Hiram.
All right, so to really grasp what goes down right at the beginning of chapter 5, we kind of need to orient ourselves. Where are we in the story? Well, King David, the legendary warrior and leader, has recently passed away. His son, Solomon, is now the freshly anointed king of Israel. Now, verses 1 through 3 jump right in and set the tone for this whole new era. Think about it. In the ancient Near East, whenever there's a transition of power, things usually get super unstable, right? But King Hiram of Tyre, he doesn't wait around. He immediately sends envoys to Solomon. Tyre, by the way, was this incredibly powerful Phoenician city-state right on the Mediterranean coast, super famous for its maritime trade. Because Hiram was a lifelong friend and a solid ally of King David, he's basically extending an olive branch of continuity here. Instead of looking at young Solomon as some untested kid ripe for conquering, Hiram treats him with massive respect. And Solomon? He receives these envoys and fires back a really profound message, reflecting on his dad's legacy to clearly lay out what his own reign is going to be all about. So Solomon perfectly contrasts these two eras in verses 3 and 4. He's painting a picture of a dramatic shift in Israel's history. He basically tells Hiram, look, my father David couldn't build a temple for the name of the Lord his God. And the reason? Purely circumstantial. David was constantly surrounded by wars. He was literally fighting off adversaries on all sides. But then Solomon drops this breathtaking new reality. He says, but now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side, and there is no adversary or disaster. In the original Hebrew, this idea of total divine peace is tied to the word manucha, which is this deep, settling, profound rest. God has essentially handed Solomon an era of absolute peace. And let me tell you, for an ancient nation, that was incredibly rare.
Section 2. The Temple Mission. Now, Solomon doesn't look at this unprecedented era of peace as just a time to, kick his feet up and relax. Not at all. In verses 4 and 5, he uses the stability to make a massive historic declaration. To Solomon, peace is a tool. It's the launch pad for a monumental mission. He states flat out, I intend, therefore, to build a temple for the name of the Lord my God. And we have to be clear here, this isn't just some random architectural ambition or like a vanity project for his ego. Solomon is explaining to Hiram that he is stepping up to fulfill the exact promise that God made to his father David. See, God had told David that the son who takes the throne after him would be the actual one to build a house for his name. Solomon fully recognizes his destiny here. He is the builder, and the time is right now. But here's the catch. To pull off a mission this grand, Solomon needs top-tier materials and expertise that Israel simply doesn't have. So in verse 6, he makes a formal request to King Hiram. He asks him to give orders to cut the magnificent cedars of Lebanon for him. If you know anything about Lebanon's mountains, you know they were world famous for these massive, ultra-high-quality cedar trees. They were absolutely perfect for monumental building, totally unlike the landscape down in Israel. But it wasn't just about getting the wood, right? It was about the workmanship. Solomon specifically calls out the Sidonians. These are the people from the region of Sidon, part of Hiram's kingdom. The Sidonians were legendary artisans. They had totally mastered the insanely difficult craft of logging on steep mountain slopes. Solomon says to Hiram, you know that we have no one so skilled in felling timber as the Sidonians. So he pitches a joint venture. His guys will work side by side with Hiram's guys, and Solomon promises to pay whatever wages Hiram sets. A real blank check. Section 3. The Lebanon Timber Deal. So how does a powerful foreign king react when his neighbor asks for a massive chunk of his most precious national resources? Well, verses 7 through 9 give us Hiram's exact reaction, and honestly, it's a beautiful moment of international diplomacy. When Hiram hears Solomon's message, the text says he was greatly pleased. He actually responds by saying, praise be to the Lord today, for he has given David a wise son to rule over this great nation. Think about that. Hiram, a foreign king, explicitly blesses the God of Israel. He totally recognizes that Solomon's wisdom comes from a divine source. He doesn't try to price gouge him. He doesn't see Israel's growing power as a threat. Instead, he just responds with absolute joy and respect, completely validating Solomon's leadership on the world stage. Right after this joyful reaction, Hiram rolls up his sleeves and gets down to business in verses 8 and 9. He fully agrees to provide all the cedar and pine logs Solomon wants, and then he outlines this brilliant logistical master plan. Step 1, Hiram's workers will haul these massive, heavy timbers all the way down from the Lebanese mountains to the Mediterranean Sea. Step 2, they're going to tie them together into huge rafts and float them by sea right down the coastline to wherever Solomon designates. Step 3, once they arrive, Hiram's men will untie them and separate them so Solomon's men can haul them inland. Let me just pause here. Floating massive, incredibly heavy timber rafts down the unpredictable Mediterranean coast in the ancient world, that was an absolute engineering marvel. It was highly dangerous, but it was hands down the most efficient supply chain solution they had. Section 4. Execution and Treaty. Now, we all know international trade is never a one-way street, right? Both of these kings are about to show tremendous integrity by actually honoring their massive commitments. Verses 10 and 11 lay out the execution of this deal. Hiram consistently provided Solomon with all the cedar and pine logs he needed, no cutting corners. In return, Solomon had to step up and fulfill Hiram's request. Interestingly, Hiram didn't ask for gold or silver. He asked for food to supply his royal household. And wow, did Solomon deliver. He provided 20,000 cores of wheat and 20,000 baths of pressed olive oil. And the text emphasizes a really crucial detail here. Solomon kept doing this for Hiram year after year. This wasn't just a one-and-done transaction. This was a deeply sustained, reliable economic partnership. To really wrap our heads around the monumental scale of this trade, we kind of need to translate these difficult Hebrew measurements into modern terms. So, a core and a bath were ancient units of volume. 20,000 cores of wheat, that translates to roughly 121,000 bushels of grain. And 20,000 baths of oil, that's about 97,000 gallons of high-quality pressed olive oil. I mean, that is just an astronomical amount of food. Just think about the highly organized agricultural infrastructure Israel needed to consistently produce, package, and export this kind of surplus year after year, just to feed Hiram's court. Moving into verse 12, the text reminds us once again, the Lord gave Solomon wisdom just as he had promised him. And the direct result of that God-given wisdom, peaceful relations between Hiram and Solomon, culminating in a formal, official treaty between the two of them. But here's the thing, raw materials and peace treaties aren't quite enough. Solomon still needed the sheer manpower to actually construct the temple. So we absolutely cannot skip the rest of the chapter. Verses 13 through 18 detail one of the most massive human mobilizations in ancient history. King Solomon conscripts a labor force from all over Israel, 30,000 men. He puts a guy named Adoniram in charge of this massive draft. And they worked in shifts. 10,000 men would go to Lebanon for a month, and then they'd get to spend 2 months at home, rotating the burden so it wasn't crushing. On top of that, Solomon had 70,000 carriers and 80,000 stonecutters working up in the hills. He even appointed 3,300 chief officers just to supervise the project. In the final verses, the king commands them to quarry these enormous, costly stones to lay the foundation of the temple with dressed stone. So you have Solomon's builders, Hiram's builders, and the Gebalites, these expert craftsmen from the city of Byblos, all working shoulder to shoulder to prepare the timber and the stone. Section 5. Key Ideas and Lessons. Okay, so we've just walked through the full history and the narrative, completely step by step. Now let's pivot a bit and talk about the practical life lessons we can extract from this chapter. Because honestly, this text is an absolute blueprint for effective living. The method we're using in this explainer is strictly the pshat. If you're not familiar, pshat is just the plain, simple, and literal meaning of the text. We aren't digging around for hidden, mystical, or esoteric secrets today. Nope, we are pulling our lessons entirely from the historical actions, the clear dialogue, and the character traits that are explicitly written right there on the page. So, methodically looking at the pshat, we found 3 incredibly powerful practical takeaways. First up, peace is required to build holy things. Just like David couldn't build during wartime, we often find it impossible to build our most meaningful projects, our strongest relationships, or even our inner lives when we're constantly surrounded by conflict and drama in our modern daily lives. We literally have to actively cultivate peace to truly build. Second lesson, win-win cooperation is powerful. Notice that Solomon didn't arrogantly demand the wood. Instead, he recognized the Sidonian superior skill, he offered fair wages, and he traded Israel's agricultural wealth for Tyre's timber. It was a win-win. Both nations thrived because they respected each other's unique strengths. And the third lesson? Honor your promises. Year after year, both of these kings delivered exactly what they said they would. At the end of the day, trust and integrity are the bedrock of any lasting treaty, business deal, or friendship. Section 6. Chapter Recap. Let's take a breath and unhurriedly lay out the entire narrative arc of the chapter just to really solidify this sequence of events in your memory. Number 1. It all starts with King Hiram taking the initiative to reach out to the newly anointed King Solomon, completely out of lifelong respect for David. Number 2, Solomon responds by proposing his grand mission to finally build the temple of the Lord, now that God has granted him this super rare era of peace. Number 3, Hiram joyfully agrees, and the two formulate this brilliant logistical agreement involving floating huge rafts of cedar by sea in exchange for massive shipments of food. Number 4, we witness the flawless execution of this treaty, with both leaders honoring their commitments year after year. And finally, number 5, Solomon mobilizes a staggering, highly organized workforce of tens of thousands of Israelites, Sidonians, and Gibealites to hew the timber and the costly foundation stones, proving that grand visions truly require immense unified effort. I really want to leave you with a provocative thought to ponder today. Take a look at your own circumstances. How can we use the times of peace in our own lives, those precious, quiet moments without crisis or adversary, to build things of lasting value? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.